Welcome to the Berkeley Research Group Thinkset Podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Newland. Berkeley Research Group is a leading global strategic advisory and expert consulting firm, providing independent advice and dispute consulting around the world to corporations, law firms, government agencies, and financial institutions. For more, please visit thinkbrg.com. On this episode of the Thinkset Podcast, we'll speak with BRG Associate Director Kelly Lynch. Kelly is considered a rising star in BRG's healthcare analytics practice. For over a decade, she has provided litigation, risk advisory, and business process improvement consulting services to a variety of companies in the healthcare arena. In this episode, Kelly discusses her work at BRG around the healthcare space, how she ended up choosing a career in consulting, and how experiences with her own family have influenced her work. And with that, let's get started. Kelly, thanks for joining us today on the Thinkset Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I can't complain. The holidays nearing. So to get started, you're a member of the BRG Healthcare, specifically health analytics practice. BRG does a number of engagements across the healthcare spectrum, but recently we've seen a rise in new types of engagements. Can you give us an idea of what those are and how your role has evolved with them?
Absolutely. And of course, my little corner of our healthcare community is only one small piece of the overall community, but we have definitely been very busy as of late. And a lot of the engagements that I personally have been working on are within the disputes and investigations area, and then some large scale litigation around PBMs and pharmacies and pharmaceutical manufacturers.
You use the term PBM there. Having had a chance to chat before this, I know that PBM stands for Pharmacy Benefits Manager. Could you explain a little bit more about PBMs and the role they play?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the work that I do revolves around PBMs, and it's one of those areas within the healthcare channel that most end users or end consumers of healthcare in the country aren't fully aware of, because it kind of plays an intermediary role between healthcare payers, the pharmacies, and the pharmaceutical manufacturers. So it's not something that when I go to sign up for my health insurance, for example, that I'm going to see or have any choice over. Whoever my healthcare payer is works with the pharmacy benefit manager, and they do that because they're trying to take some of the work for themselves out of the drug benefit side of their business. So PBMs will go out and negotiate with pharmacies to create pharmacy networks on behalf of healthcare payers. They will also go out and negotiate with pharmaceutical manufacturers on behalf of payers in order to get rebates on certain brand drugs in the market. As you can tell just from that brief description, they're involved with a lot of different areas within the drug area of healthcare in this country. So there's a lot of different types of disputes and investigations that we work on within that space. And obviously, we've been seeing a lot in the media lately about the increasing costs of drug prices. And as those costs have increased, there's obviously more increased scrutiny on where's the cost stemming from, who is responsible. And so there's a lot more focus on the relationship between pharmacies and PBMs and payers and the manufacturers. And so obviously when that scrutiny starts to come down, you start to see more investigations, more disputes within the channel, and more litigation.
That definitely makes sense. I've read a lot about specifically a rise in what I believe is called specialty pharmacies, which handle the medications that can cost as much as $35,000 for fill. Why are the prices so high?
So there's not just one type of pharmacy. It's not like you have the opportunity to walk into your mom and pop pharmacy on the corner and acquire any drug that's on the market. There are certain drugs that, based on the type of handling, the cost, the different services that need to be rendered as part of the dispense of that drug, that not all pharmacies want to take on that risk. And that risk is really somewhat around the cost of the drugs, but also around, specialized care in nursing or testing that has to be done for patients who are taking the drugs. Using obviously real world examples are always helpful. My father has been battling prostate cancer for the past couple years. And it's part of that, the work that I do. It's been actually really nice in a way, because I understand specialty pharmacies. And he's been having to take a lot of drugs that are $25,000 per fill, and he's taking them quarterly. They cost, in aggregate, really about $100,000 per year. And they're not drugs that he can just go to the local pharmacy and pick up. And these drugs, a lot of them, you have to speak with a nurse to make sure that you understand the handling instructions. A lot of them are infusion drugs or injectables. They're not just you take a pill, you put it in your mouth, you take a glass of water, make sure to take it with food. The instructions and the requirements around these drugs are significant, and they're for a lot of different health outcomes, cancer, HIV, hepatitis C. They kind of run the spectrum. They're life-saving drugs, but the reason we're seeing more about specialty pharmacy is because of the cost associated with these drugs. And obviously, the drugs are getting more complex, which is great. They're finding drugs that are able to cure things we couldn't cure 10 to 15 years ago. But obviously, with those additional complexities in the drugs, we're going to see increases in the prices. But I think specialty pharmacy also has the increased scrutiny because there's costs around just the distribution of that drug from, you have to have nurses, you have to have doctors sometimes on call for these drugs.
Let's talk about some of those particular cost factors. Is it true that if I'm required to go to a specialty pharmacy to receive a prescription, it's likely that the prescription itself requires a professional, say a nurse or a doctor, to actually administer?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. I mean, using my dad again as an example, so his is an injection, but he actually takes it with him to the doctor's office, who actually does the injection there. Because every time he has to go in, not only do they inject it, but they also have to run a series of blood tests before he takes it to make sure that it's going to be okay. So there's a lot of testing. There's also a lot of times too where a nurse is going to come in and just give you kind of the lay of the land before you start taking it. This is how you set up the infusion. They come to your house, they show you how to set everything up. So, yeah, there's a lot of care that goes on with these drugs. And that's really just in the actual side of taking the drugs. There's a lot of other work that's done by specialty pharmacies on the side of financial assistance and helping to make sure that patients are getting the drugs that they need, because the cost of these are high. And there's a lot of great programs out there through the manufacturers and through other assistance programs to help cover some of the very high costs associated with these specialty drugs.
Yeah, not just the person in the white coat standing behind the counter handing out the pills,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
thankfully what most of us, that's the only exposure we have. And I think that struggle for a general consumer to understand. I mean, the process that you just outlined with your father, probably more people than you think have gone through something similar. But if you've been fortunate enough not to have to experience something like that, you might not understand the complexities that go into it. And you see drug prices on TV and everybody freaking out. But hearing that, I think most people can appreciate that there's a lot more that goes into it than just creation of a pill, somebody showing up at the local retail pharmacy, putting down their benefits card, paying for it, and heading home to just take it with a glass of water, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, actually, one topic I wanted to ask you about is the opioid crisis. Obviously, a very big problem we face here in the US today. In your opinion, is that something data can help us combat?
This goes to one of my favorite things about my job, which is the fact that, yes, I do think that there is information that can be learned using data. And that's one of the reasons that, I think our health analytics practice was so appealing when I came over. Was I think we are naturally storytellers within our practice. And so we use data to tell our stories. And when we have claims data on opioids, which is publicly available through a lot of different states through their Medicaid programs, and the federal government, we're able to actually pull down a lot of opioid data. We actually can go and analyze millions of claims records or whatever it may be, whether it's for a white paper or for a client or whatever it is. And there's definitely a lot of litigation out in that space right now around opioids. But we're able to kind of see what are the trends at a state level? What are the trends in opioid use at a zip code level? We can get down to very, very small geographic areas in the US. We have the ability to use the claims data to go in and see any other patterns in prescribers or in kind of what was the pattern that led to a patient taking opioids. What were the original health indications that that patient had? What was their drug treatment history? And then kind of looking at how did we end up here? And I think that data really helps to tell the story and hopefully go back and try to find what really is the root cause of the issue and how can we make sure that going forward, we're able to put some controls and restrictions in place to curb this type of abuse before it gets to the point that it is right now in this country.
In your work, what tools do you use with the data? Everybody obviously knows Excel holds vast amounts of data. I don't imagine you're doing all of this through pivot tables. What tools do you guys use to help map this out so that you can get to the point where you're seeing hard numbers that you can make arguments based upon?
So when I joined BRG, Excel to me was the catch-all. I used it for everything. Every once in a while, I'd use a little bit of Access. And when I came here, my eyes were opened to the world of more robust analytics tools. We use a lot of Microsoft SQL to do our more heavy lifting in analytics. When we're getting this claims data, I mean, and you can think about it as an example. Let's say my client is a pharmacy in the state of New York and they've been dispensing drugs for 10 years. We're talking about millions of records of data here. Excel can't hold that volume. So we use SQL a lot when we are trying to actually crunch the numbers, which is really, really helpful because I used to crash Excel on a pretty regular basis. But SQL is great. And it also gives us the ability to have a very clear audit trail for the type of work that we're doing. Obviously, in the litigation space, there's a lot of times where we need to be able to make sure that we're not 80% sure of our results, we're 110% sure that our results are correct. And using SQL really gives us a much easier framework in order to replicate our results, to speak to what we put together and why. So SQL is great, but there's a lot of other things we use here at BRG. We use SAS and Stata. We use Tableau when we're doing more visualization of the results. But I'm old school, and when I can, I always try to get right back into Excel because it feels like home to me. But we're always looking for new things out there, and we're always trying to kind of stay ahead of what's going to come in the data next. And for example, I deal a lot in what I'd call non-standard data. So I deal a lot with patient chart notes. And so it's not going to be something that's going to be as easy as everything in one row is going to have a value of 1 through 10. These are going to be nurses or customer service reps or doctors that are actually entering in information on a patient. So a lot of times what we're doing there is we're taking these patient chart notes and we're mining through that information and trying to find particular strings of words or certain indications that patients might have called in about, and to see how the customer service reps or the nurses treated a problem or a question that a patient had. So it's not always just that we're dealing with standard data. We get messy data that is just continuously challenging us. And we're always trying to find new ways to evaluate it and to help tell the story that we need to tell.
Yeah, I can appreciate, especially when it gets into the millions, how complicated that must be. You mentioned a couple of times that before you came to BRG, obviously you didn't graduate and join the firm right away. We hadn't even gotten off the ground at that point. But where did you start out your career, and what led you to BRG?
So I started off college as a music theater major back in 2001. So there, I just aged myself. But I was going to school right around September 11. The world was changing. There was a lot of uncertainty. And here I was spending 50K of my parents' money a year to go be a music theater major. So I had a realization my freshman year. I said, I think I need to do something that's more realistic, something that I know there's going to be a job out there for, regardless of what's going on in this world. I'm going to go to school for accounting.
Oh man, an even sexier profession.
I know. I really kind of crossed the spectrum there from music theater to accounting, but it seemed like something that was smart and it seemed like something I could use. And, that was also around the time of the Enron scandal. And so accountants all of a sudden were doing fraud investigations. And to me at the time, it did sound pretty hip for better or for worse. That's what sounded hip to
Yeah.
me. So I ended up going to school for accounting, but I had the realization while I was in school that a lot of accounting work is very repetitive. You're doing the same thing for different clients. You're checking boxes, you're going in and you're doing the same thing on a daily basis. And I was telling the story at a work conference recently, but I was working at a client while I was interning in college, and I was an auditor for state and local governments. And I was in the bathroom one day in the women's room, and these two women came in and they didn't see me. And they started talking about how much they hate the auditors and they hate the audit process. And it's so annoying. And these people are terrible. And it was like a light bulb went off. I said, why do I want to work in a career where I'm the people are, they're running away from me when I come into their offices? And so I knew I didn't want to be an accountant, and I didn't know how else to really leverage my accounting degree. And I was nervous, but I started working at my mom's company when I was in college. It was an energy company. And they had these consultants in there dealing with this new compliance requirement that everybody was complaining about, but that these consultants were really helping them with this Sarbanes-Oxley compliance that they were all of a sudden having to implement. So I'm like, oh, they like these consultants. This is great. So I went to actually work for that particular consulting firm called Protiviti after college, doing a lot of risk management and internal audit work after I graduated. Not exactly where I thought I was going to be 4.5 years after I started off taking music appreciation classes and intellectual property for musicians my freshman year in college.
Yeah. If your first semester professors could see you now. So, given that you've had this interesting career arc, started at one end of the spectrum and came back out the other, I'd have to admit I fit a similar profile where I probably had 4 majors in college. And when I graduated, I was a golf pro. And now here I am, a marketing and business development specialist. So, be that as it may, I don't think we're that unique. People come across a few things and times change, and everybody wants to make sure they put themselves in the best position to succeed.
Yeah.
So, if you were to give somebody advice looking to get into consulting, something I imagine you do pretty often, what do you say? What types of skills are important beyond obviously Excel? What skills do you think are best suited for the industry?
I don't think there's a one size fits all approach to get into consulting. I think the people that always end up being very successful in consulting are the people that are just constantly trying to learn new information. They're constantly out there trying to figure out new problems, understand new industries. There's a lot of intrigue in the people I think that succeed in consulting. And I think college sets you up with a lot of really nice skills. I tell people this a lot when I'm out recruiting for BRG. I don't think there's particular classes necessarily that are going to set you up to be really successful in the consulting space, especially because I think consulting is one of my least favorite words because I think it's such a broad description
Mm-hmm.
of the space. I mean, like I said, I started off doing risk management and internal audit work, and I was a consultant. And then I was a consultant who was doing healthcare IT risk consulting, where I was in the information technology space. And then I was in government contracts consulting, looking at how to implement internal controls for healthcare companies that had contracts with the government. And now I'm a consultant and I'm doing litigations and dispute work. So there's just, it's a really general term. And a lot of kids on campus, when they say, I want to be a consultant, I'm like, why? What does that mean to you? I think that it's one of those things where you kind of get into it and it's like a choose your own adventure. You end up just kind of finding something that interests you. For me, I kind of had a boomerang with healthcare, which is how I kind of came back into the space. I took about 3 years off, luckily only 3 years before I came fully back into the healthcare space. But I think the key thing is finding something, whether it's an industry or whether it's a skill set. Some people get really into the analytics side. They want to be the best coder they can in SQL and SAS and Stata and these different programs. And that's something that really interests them and kind of keeps them up at night. They want to get better. They're more interested in that. There's some people that find that about an industry. They're fascinated by the energy industry. They're fascinated by healthcare. And there's about 15 different types of consulting that you can do within a particular industry. But I think as long as people kind of find that thing that keeps them up at night in a good way, not in a I can't sleep because I'm worried sort of way, but in a good way where you're interested in something and you constantly want to learn more, that's the area that you should be focusing in on. And it might be consulting in that space. It might be go into industry and you work in that space for a healthcare organization and then you end up in consulting later. But I really think that that's how I ended up coming back to healthcare was I tried a bunch of different industries and nothing really drew me back like healthcare did. And it was really, at the end of the day, I'm not a nurse. I'm not out there, helping people stay alive. I'm not in the schools. I'm not teaching. But I feel like for me with healthcare, it was something that I felt a personal connection to from my personal life, that if I could do anything to make the industry run a little bit smoother, a little bit better, a little bit more efficient, that's where I wanted to place my energy. And it's also one of those industries that is constantly changing. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with people that enjoy consulting. People in consulting are constantly looking for a new idea, a new project, a new challenge. Healthcare has always got a new challenge every single day. It seems like there's a new question that needs to be answered. And so, healthcare consulting, when you pull all that together, it's really great for people who want that constant quest for knowledge and to learn something new or to be challenged.
Perfect. Well, Kelly, I think that's a great way to end our conversation today. Thanks so much for joining us on the Thinkset podcast, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
This Thinkset podcast is brought to you by the Berkeley Research Group. You can subscribe to the podcast and access other content from Thinkset Magazine by going to thinksetmag.com. I'm Eddie Newland, and thanks for listening. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the opinions, position, or policy of Berkeley Research Group or its other employees and affiliates.